Brian O'Nolan is one of the most important writers of the 20th century. Though sometimes overlooked, each of his works, while vastly different in their own ways, are all united under one commonality. They are built around a central joke. Brian O'Nolan was born in 1911 in Strabane, County Tyrone, and was raised in a predominantly Irish-speaking household, though he wrote mainly in English over his career only because Irish wasn't the vernacular. He excelled at University College Dublin, though he spent more time in pubs than lecture halls. As he wrote of his time in university, "The whole university concept I found to be a sham. The only result my father got for his money was the certainty that his son had laid faultlessly the foundation of a system of heavy drinking, and could always be relied upon to make a break of at least 25, even with a bad cue. I sincerely believe that if university education were universally available and availed of, the country would collapse in one generation." He wrote for the university magazine under the pseudonym Brother Barnabas. Here he produced articles in the Irish language that even his Gaelic lecturers could not fully comprehend. A few years after graduating, he secured a well-paying job in the civil service, and at the age of 28, he published a book of outstanding virtuosity. This novel, which dealt with the novel as a form, and is often considered to be the last book that O'Nolan's idol, James Joyce, ever read, was praised by the latter as being the work of a real writer who had the true comic spirit. At Swim Two Birds was born at last. The book is about a student who's writing a book about a man who's writing a book about characters that are not happy about how the author controls their lives. This book was amongst the first to break away from modernism, the kind of writing seen with Joyce, Woolf and Faulkner, to postmodernism, the kind seen with Beckett, Zadie Smith and Kazuo Ishiguro. Apart from being hilariously funny, perhaps the most noticeable feature of his novels are to make the bizarre feel commonplace and the ordinary feel foreign. Under the pseudonym Flann O'Brien, O'Nolan writes casually of the atomic theory, whereby atoms are exchanged between things that make contact with one another, just as a bar of iron and coal hammer would exchange atoms if they were to connect with each other. As the sergeant in his novel, The Third Policeman, writes, "The gross and net result of it is that people who spend most of their natural lives riding iron bicycles over the rocky roadsteads of this parish get their personalities mixed up with the personalities of their bicycle as a result of the interchanging of the atoms of each of them. And you would be surprised at the number of people in these parts who nearly are half people and half bicycles." Despite the praise that Swim Two Birds received, publishers were reluctant to publish more of O'Nolan's work following the destruction of their stock during an air raid in World War II. As the editor wrote, "We realise the author's ability, but think that he should become less fantastic, and in this new novel he is more so." Devastated by the rejection of his second novel, O'Nolan kept it on a sideboard in his dining room, in plain view of where he ate, for the next 26 years. He would continue contributing to the Irish Times with his Cruiskeen Lawn column under the pen name of Miles Nagopaleen, and while Miles's column was praised on a weekly basis, O'Brien's subsequent novels, while moderately well received, endured a perceived decline in quality. O'Nolan's drinking worsened over the years. His Cruiskeen Lawn column became increasingly political, damaging the reputations of high-ranking government officials. The final straw involved an article he wrote about the then Lord Mayor of Dublin, Andy Clarkin. Clarkin's coal merchant shop on Pearse Street was fitted with a protruding clock. The clock's time, however, was fixed at 5 to 9. O'Nolan was annoyed at Clarkin as he felt it was his civic duty to fix it, though he never did. In response, O'Nolan established the Axis campaign, which stood for Andy Clarkin's Clock is Still Stopped. To intimates of Clarkin and certain members of the public in the know, Axis had another private meaning for Clarkin. When asked difficult political questions, he would always defer to his wife, Sis. "I'm not sure," he'd say. "I'd have to ask Sis about that." O'Nolan's termination from the civil service was, in some ways, a relief, in that he could dedicate his time to writing. But his final novels lacked the spark or innovation that was so apparent in his early works. His final novel, The Dalkey Archive, borrowed passages, word for word, from his rejected novel, The Third Policeman. A lifelong smoker, he was diagnosed with throat cancer and hospitalised in 1966. On March 2nd he wrote, Anybody who has the courage to raise his eyes and look sanely at the awful human condition must realise finally that tiny periods of temporary relief from intolerable suffering is the most that any individual has the right to expect. He died peacefully on the 1st of April, 1966, more commonly known as April Fool's Day. After his death, his wife, Evelyn, submitted his rejected novel once more. The Third Policeman was published at last. Almost immediately, it became a masterpiece.